All right, in this video I wanted to go over some important terminology around something we call microbial trophisms, or different ways of being trophic. So first, to start, we just have to define the terminology, and then we can think about a systematic way of employing that terminology. So let's start just by thinking about how we can define the terminology. So we're going to talk about a bunch of words that end in troph or trophic, right? So troph is just a way of ending a word to communicate that this word defines how an organism obtains its food. So what is the specific way that this organism obtains its food? Now that terminology around food is a little bit weird because I think we need to expand our sort of understanding of what food might be for different kinds of organisms. So let's think about that really quickly, and then we'll talk about a few more words. So food, what's in our food? Like if you and I eat some food, why are we eating that? What is the benefit we as an organism get from our food? So in general, when we talk about food for organisms, we're talking about two things that the organisms need to obtain. The first thing an organism needs to obtain from its food, or its food source, is energy. So again, you and I eat food so that we can use that energy to move our muscles and power our brains. So some troph words refer to the way that the organism gets energy. The other thing we need from food are molecular building blocks. So I eat food so that I can make more muscle out of the things that are in that food. Or I eat food so that I can make more brain cells out of the things that are in that food. So food provides us with these important building blocks. And in biology, really the number one building block we're concerned about is carbon. So really when I say molecular building blocks, I'm referring to what is the source of carbon atoms for this organism. So we're going to have some of these troph pieces of terminology that refer to where do the organisms get their carbon. Okay. So again, this important terminology of troph or trophisms refers to the organism's food. And when we're talking about food, we're really talking about how do they obtain energy and how do they obtain carbon. So we're going to build up these words to describe how they obtain energy and how they obtain carbon. So we're going to add things in front of troph. So for example, we might add to the beginning of the word photo. So if you see the word phototroph, it's really telling you this photo part is saying, well, light energy is involved. The way these organisms get energy is from light, and that energy is an important part of their food. They're a phototroph. So the typical phototrophs are things like photosynthetic organisms, plants, but there's also tons of photosynthetic microorganisms in the world, and we'll be talking about them in this course. The other troph piece of terminology you might see, or another, is chemotroph. So chemo just refers to chemical energy, or energy from chemicals. So again, if you put chemo in front of troph, it's saying, hey, you break apart chemicals through catabolism, and those catabolic reactions release energy, and this organism uses that energy as their energy source. So this is most of the organisms we typically think about in biology. Like for example, you and I, we eat food, we digest that food to get the energy out. We're breaking apart the chemicals through catabolic reactions to get that energy out. We are chemotrophs. All right, so those two pieces of terminology will describe how the organism gets its energy, either from light or from chemicals. And those are really the only two options. So there are phototrophs and there are chemotrophs. But we'll add additional terminology to describe where these organisms get their carbon atoms, again, those molecular building blocks, so they can make new things in the organism. So one descriptor we might add is to say that an organism is a heterotroph. So hetero really refers to other or different, not the same. So a heterotroph is referring to an organism that is obtaining its carbon from other organisms. So again, this terminology describes you and I, right? Our typical foods are other living things. We might eat fruits or vegetables or meat from an animal, right? So in this way, we are eating other organisms. We are taking apart the molecules that those organisms have so that we can use the carbon atoms to make our own molecules. So we are heterotrophs. We get that carbon from other living things, again, through our food. The last piece of terminology is to say that something is an autotroph. So auto, like automatic, or in this case, auto sort of means from within. So this is just saying that an organism is sort of making its own food. That is to say, it's putting together carbon to make its own food. More specifically, autotroph means that these organisms get carbon from CO2 in the air. We call this an inorganic source of carbon, right? So heterotrophs get their carbon from organic things, other organisms, and autotrophs get their carbon from inorganic things, non-living organisms or non-living things like carbon dioxide in the air. So to understand these trophisms, we just need to understand these 5 pieces of terminology, and then we need to be able to put them together in the right way. So to give you an approach for doing that, I want to lay out a pattern of questions that you can answer so that you can put this terminology together in an appropriate way. So here's what I'll recommend you do. If you ever hear a story about an organism and the story gives you some information about where it gets its energy and where it gets its carbon, ask yourself this question first. Identify the source of energy first. So where is this organism getting its energy from? And again, there are only 2 places or 2 mechanisms by which organisms can gather energy to power their biological processes. They can either get it from the light. Again, light makes them a phototroph. Or they can get it from chemicals. And getting it from chemicals makes them a chemotroph. Once we've identified that mechanism, how is the organism getting energy, we can then ask a follow-up question. How do they get carbon? Again, carbon's the building block so they can make new things. So we identify their energy source. We know they're either a phototroph or a chemotroph. And now we ask, where do they get their carbon from? And then if we answer this question, we should have a full identifier for the organism. So for example, if we've said that our organism is a phototroph, and then we wonder where do they get their carbon from? One option, again, is that they can break down organic chemicals. Basically, they can eat the molecules of other living things. That would make them a photoheterotroph. If they're a phototroph and they don't get their carbon from organic chemicals, they must get it from carbon dioxide, inorganic sources. So we'll call them a photoautotroph. Let me move my head out of the way over here. And then on this side, we'll think about, well, what if it was a chemotroph? So we've decided that our organism gathers energy from chemicals, doing catabolism of chemicals. We then ask, well, where does their carbon come from? And there are, again, the exact same 2 possible answers. They can get it by digesting organic chemicals, again, eating other living things to get their carbon. That would make this organism a chemoheterotroph. Or they can get their carbon from the air, again, inorganic sources like CO2, and that would make them a chemoautotroph. And in this way, by following this simple pattern of question asking and then applying these 5 pieces of terminology, we can appropriately label any organism we talk about. And so every living thing falls into one of these 4 categories: photoheterotrophs, photoautotrophs, chemoautotrophs, or chemoheterotrophs. So I hope this will help you think through these categories and how to apply them. And if you have any questions, I hope you'll let me know. I'll talk to you all very soon.